I do believe that we actually are experiencing a bigger boom right now than the internet. And that's because the AI boom rides on top of all these other booms, right? It rides on top of the internet boom. It rides on top of the development of mobile and mobile internet.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Gildre Spotlight podcast. Today we have an exciting guest. His name is Chris Yeh. He is an investor, author, speaker, and he is currently the co-author of a book called Blitzscaling. He was the co-author with it and wrote it with his friend Reid Hoffman, which is no small feat. But Chris, I'd love for you to give a quick introduction to our listeners.
Thank you so much, Taiga. So, as you've heard, I'm mostly known as an author. Blitzscaling is one of my books. I also wrote another best-selling book called The Alliance, and I helped Reid with a book that we wrote using the aid of AI called Impromptu. And in addition to being an author, I am also a venture capitalist. So I run a firm called Blitzscaling Ventures that invests in startups that we think have the ability to win extremely valuable winner-take-most markets.
Wow. That's amazing. And just to, start with your career, early on, did you always want to be an author and a venture capitalist?
Excellent question. So, from the time I was young, I was interested in being an author. I think a lot of us, we grow up, we love reading, and eventually say, hey, wait a minute, somebody has to write these things. Wouldn't it be cool to be that person? And I was like that as well. And as I got older, I got into my high school years, I decided, well, let me research this profession and see how it works. And I was like, whoa, this is a terrible profession. Most of the people don't make any money. And most of the people who do make any money make very little money. And this is not a good thing. So when I was at Stanford as an undergraduate, I studied creative writing, but I also studied product design engineering because I said, you know what? It's probably good to do some things that can actually make money. But I still didn't know anything about venture capital. I went to college in the early 1990s, and this was before everyone in the world knew what a venture capitalist was or what a startup was. This was in the dawn of the internet era, but even before the Netscape IPO. So this was long, long ago. I had no idea. But what I did know from using products at Stanford was the fact that I thought the internet was going to change the world. It was something that I was using every single day, and it's something that I figured the entire world would eventually adopt, which has proven to be the case. And so even though I didn't know anything about startup capital or anything like that, I knew I wanted to work on. And so I ended up taking a job with D.E. Shaw and Company, the very secretive, very successful quantitative hedge fund that Jeff Bezos worked for before he started Amazon. And I joined D.E. Shaw to work on their startup activities, moved out from Silicon Valley to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and worked on a couple of projects, one of which, Juno Online Services, actually went public in 1999. So I had a set of experiences there. But I also then left D.E. Shaw to go to Harvard Business School because I really wanted to learn traditional ways of doing business. And after I graduated from Harvard Business School, I moved back to Silicon Valley. By then, I was already running my first startup. I'd started a startup in business school instead of doing a summer job. And I've been in the startup world ever since. So this is my 30th anniversary of being in high tech and startups. Now, as my career got further along, eventually I started moving away from being a founder or operator into being more of an investor and advisor. So I started doing angel investments in the mid 2000s. And after Blitzscaling came out in 2018 and was pretty successful, it seemed like a good time to make the transition into venture capital as well. So I'd done a lot of startup investing at that point, and Blitzscaling Ventures is the first time I completely professionalized it.
Wow. So there is a lot to unpack kind of with your entire career. The first, you know, one of the first things that come to mind is, you went to Stanford undergrad, uh, had an extensive career, then you went back to get your MBA at Harvard. What makes you a lifelong learner, and why did you continue to kind of go that educational route when you already had a pretty established career?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in learning just in general. Of course, that can happen in the classroom setting. That can also happen outside the classroom setting. And I often tell people that some of the most important things that I learned at these very expensive schools that I went to took place outside the classroom or outside of a traditional academic class. So for me, the reason you have to keep learning is because the world is always changing. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I joined DE Shaw, we were launching a company, Juno Online Services, which went public. Juno Online Services was a free email service that gave people email accounts that they used with their dial up modems. And what you would do is you would get a free floppy disk in the mail from Juno, and you'd put it into your computer and install it. And it would use your modem to dial up, download your email. And then when you were done and ready to send, it would dial up your modem and send the email. Now, for many of the people listening, they have no idea what a modem is. They have no idea what a floppy disk is. All of this sounds insane. If I showed them a picture of a computer, they wouldn't recognize it as a computer because it was this giant tower with a big cathode ray tube, all these things. And mind you, the way we marketed this was we rented lists of magazine subscribers and then we mailed them the floppy disks. Now, again, people listening are like, what's a magazine? What's mail? Right? These are all things that are completely gone, or not completely, but almost completely gone. So if all I did was to continue to rely on the lessons I learned early in my career, I'd be wandering around right now saying, okay, how do I promote some of these new artificial intelligence products by mailing floppy disks to magazine subscribers? World doesn't stand still. It's constantly changing, and everyone, no matter what fancy educational institution they went to, has to keep learning and changing if they want to stay relevant in this world.
That's a I feel like that's a fantastic answer, and I 100% agree. And I think a lot of it seems like a lot of people in specific industries stay kind of, I guess, more archaic industries like finance or, you know, there's a handful of them continue to do the same function in their job their whole entire careers, and it seems like they either stagnate or plateau.
Well,
So
here's the thing. Let's imagine you are working in the least technology oriented profession you could possibly imagine. So let's say you are a blacksmith. And your job is you have a forge, you have a hammer, you make horseshoes, you hand forge your horseshoes on your forge. You fill up your forge with coal, you pump the bellows, you have an apprentice, all that sort of thing. Even that blacksmith probably has, well, I have to go on TikTok. I have to go on Blacksmith Talk in order to promote what
right.
I'm doing with the horseshoes. I have to spend money on a Facebook advertising campaign to make sure I'm reaching the right equestrians. Like, there's no way, even for a blacksmith, to say, forget this technology. Like, I'm using technology that was invented 3,000 years ago. Nope, because you still live in the same world as the rest of us. And so there's no escaping the need to adapt.
It and kind of to go on, just as far as technology and innovation, it's so interesting that, you started your career in kind of the dot-com bubble, which is, the internet kind of booming in the late 90s, early 2000s. Um, and then pretty much right now is the AI boom.
That's right.
Would you kind of compare the, dot-com bubble to this AI boom, or do you think it's bigger or more,
So
impactful?
there are
Yeah.
definitely a lot of similarities, right? The sense of excitement, the fact that things are changing, the fact that, instead of just it being the province of the largest companies in the world, that there are upstarts like OpenAI or Anthropic that are really helping to lead the way. So there are a lot of similarities. I do believe that we actually are experiencing a bigger boom right now than the internet. And that's because the AI boom rides on top of all these other booms, right? It rides on top of the internet boom. It rides on top of the development of mobile and mobile internet. It rides on top of all these things and grows faster as a result. I think famously, ChatGPT was the fastest growing product in history, faster than anything that came before it. And that's because when Facebook came out, it couldn't spread on Facebook by definition. It had to rely on people emailing each other, and there were no social networks they could tap into. Whereas with ChatGPT, everyone's like, oh, what's this ChatGPT thing I keep hearing about on TikTok, on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, etc. Pretty soon you try it out. So it is bigger than anything that's come before. And I think that just means it's a great opportunity for all the people out there.
Do you think that right now is the most exciting time in history, just as far as where we are going? I mean, job wise, technology wise, it feels like we're kind of on the precipice of so many different innovations that are coming in the next 5 to 10 years.
Completely agree. I have said to many people when this AI boom kicked off, I'm like, thank goodness I'm still young enough to paddle out and ride this wave.
Mhm.
Because, you can imagine if this AI wave hits and you're 75 years old, 80 years old, it's kind of hard to do. There are exceptions. I will point out that Vinod Khosla, the founder of Khosla Ventures, is a legendary entrepreneur and venture capitalist. He actually co-founded Sun Microsystems, a name that only the old people will remember, but was once one of the most valuable companies in the world. And Vinod is, I think, in his 70s now. And Khosla Ventures is one of the first investors in OpenAI. They're one of the leading AI investors out there. And the fact that he is 70 something does not stop him from still doing amazing things. But for most of us, you know what? It gets harder and harder as we get older. So I'm really glad that's happening now. I think everyone who's alive and active right now is very lucky.
And just as far as people adapting to it, are as far as understanding AI, to its full capacity, what are kind of some ways that you've been able to, understand AI just because it's such a brand new topic? It's only been, really since October 2022. It's been booming in kind of the, mainstream type of technology that we're using for our careers and everyday life. What are kind of some ways that, you can adapt to it and start using it easier?
Yeah, so there are several. The first is just understand at its core how it works, where we have these large language models that are really good prediction machines, and they're really good at matching existing patterns.
Hmm.
And just understanding, okay, this is how we should use them. So we often think of AI as this magical thing that can do anything. Not true.
Hmm.
Anybody who uses AI for any length of time very quickly realizes, hey, it can't do everything that I want it to do. And so understanding what it actually is good at is critical. So, for example, as an author, I sometimes need to write books or create content quickly, and I can leverage AI to do that. But I can't leverage AI to just do it all for me because it's good at certain things and not at others. If I need AI to come up with something that is very conventional, that is based on consensus, that is something that most people agree on, it's going to be great at that. If I ask it to come up with an individual point of view, I have to come up with that point of view. Now, I could then ask AI to support that point of view, and it might be able to do a decent job. But coming up with that fundamental original insight is something that really requires a human being. There are ways to simulate it with AI by basically, mashing up two things that normally aren't mashed up. That's why if you ask AI to write a report on the latest deliberation of the Federal Reserve, but write it in the form of Shakespearean sonnets, it does this amazing job better than almost any human could do. That's because very few human beings understand the Federal Reserve and also write Shakespearean sonnets. But if you talk to somebody who is a member of the Federal Reserve, they'd say, well, that's not very insightful. And if you talk to somebody who's a Shakespeare scholar, they would say, these suck. It's just the combination that makes them seem so magical. So understand how AI actually works. The second thing that is really critical is to say, look, what AI does is it amplifies us. And the funny thing about AI is it amplifies the highly skilled more than it amplifies the unskilled. Now, the reason it seems like it amplifies your lack of skill or ignorance is because what it does seems so amazing. So I often ask people in audiences, hey, have you ever used AI to do something you really didn't know a lot about? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, how were the results? And they're like, wow, it was amazing. It was magical. Like, great. Have you ever used AI to do something that you actually know a lot about? They're like, yeah. How were the results? Not really good, pretty mid. I'm like, okay, what makes you think you're different than any other expert? Right? All this stuff that AI produces seems magical to you because you don't know anything about it. And it's not, and in some sense, it's helping you because it's allowing you to simulate that knowledge that you didn't have before. But it's mediocrity. It allows you to create this mediocrity that looks cool to you because you don't know a lot about it. In fact, to really create something of value in AI, because anyone can create mediocre stuff with AI, you need to have that expertise. You need to have that knowledge, and you need to work with the AI to let that AI amplify the insights, the aspirations, the inspirations you already have.
Wow. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think, people that are more skilled and understand how to utilize AI can absolutely, it's, be a lot more productive, get a lot more work done. Ultimately, it seems like it's democratizing kind of the creative process in a lot of
Yeah.
different things like writing. For me, for example, I actually take the transcript of these podcasts and help. I mean, AI helps them turn into blogs, and it's actually
Yes.
fantastic.
And
Saves me a lot.
that is great because you already have the raw materials. And what AI can do is say, okay, I need to take this transcript and I need to put it in the format of an essay. All right, great. That's something AI is perfect at. And I actually welcome that because prior to this AI revolution, as someone who did a lot of podcasts and then created blogs based on those podcasts, it took much, much longer to create the blog post than it did to record the podcast. Recording the
Right.
podcast takes an hour. Creating the blog post of the podcast takes like 7 or 8 hours. Like, Jesus, who wants to take the time to do that? But now AI can do that, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. And being in academia, I know you mentioned that you're a professor, um,
Instructor at
or
Stanford.
instructor, excuse me, instructor. Uh,
Professor would imply that I have a PhD, which sadly I do not.
got it. Well, an instructor, have you seen, just as far as, the content that's generated by your students pre-AI, post-AI, has the content changed? Have you noticed any, major differences?
Well, the key is that the way I evaluate my students does not involve them writing essays.
Okay.
And that's by design. Right? Because it is 100% true. Like, for example, I had to write a book about venture capital. And so, one of the things about venture capital that is well known now is the power law. Right. So, how does the power law apply to venture capital? How the bulk of the returns are the result of the outliers. Great. I don't want to write that. That's been written 1,000 times at this point. And so you can leverage AI to do that. And so I don't want to be the kind of instructor that says, hey, why don't you write something that shows me that you know what I already know? I want them to show me something I didn't know. I want them to deliver some sort of special personal insight or something like that. And
Okay.
so, what I ask people to do when I'm teaching is to write about their own personal experiences, their own reactions, as opposed to the standard sort of academic thing of here, write this thing for evaluation purposes. Because guess what? It doesn't make any sense anymore. People will just use AI to do that. And I'm not going to try to get around it by banning AI. I'm going to get around it by creating assignments that require them to demonstrate their human thinking.
Well, so I want to go back on your career and journey. I think we can kind of have a whole entire separate podcast on AI. It's just such a extensive
Mm.
topic. Um, Going back on your career, what I mean, did you grow up in Silicon Valley originally?
So I actually grew up in Santa Monica, California. So steeped deep in the entertainment industry, although again, that's not where I ended up, although I still have an affinity for the entertainment industry. I just recently watched K-pop Demon Hunters on Netflix to make sure I understood what was going on with this very important piece of IP that seems to be sweeping the world.
Wow. Um, Very interesting. So growing up, and it makes sense why, you wanted to be a writer, because a lot of authors and entertainers
Exactly.
are
Storytelling. LA is all about storytelling.
what, I mean, besides obviously starting your career and, earning some, ends meet, why else did you jump into kind of entrepreneurship? Um, Moreover, just tech in general. It seems like you're involved in a lot of technology companies.
Yeah. So I was always very interested in technology as well when I was growing up. My father actually has a PhD in electrical engineering from UCLA. And so when I was growing up, I was also interested potentially in being a scientist or engineer. And obviously, I did go on to study engineering as well, even though I didn't practice it in real life. But, I was at Stanford, which meant that I had to take all these engineering classes. So I put together circuit boards in the electrical engineering class and I calculated environmental reports for civil engineering. And I actually went into the machine shop and pounded wet oil sand and created molds and cast bronze pieces and things like that. Because as an engineer, you train on all those things. And so I've always had this affinity for technology. And I think it's because technology is this amazing multiplier. right? Much like we discussed with AI, technology allows us to do these things we couldn't otherwise do. Everything around us is technology, and technology is also the thing that tends to change the world. So for all those reasons, I was always interested. I just didn't know where it would come from. Again, as a child, I was probably thinking more along the lines of I'm going to build it all myself. But as I got older and the internet came around, I eventually realized, the real value lies in putting the business together. And I always remember this because most people don't know this anymore because it's so long ago, but Mark Andreessen was best known as an entrepreneur, not a venture capitalist at the start of his career. He created Netscape, which was the first commercial web browser. And I remember when Netscape went public, I was super impressed. I was like, wow, this company went public. It's now worth $2 billion. And Mark Andreessen's now worth $100 million. That's amazing. I can't even imagine $100 million. And then I looked and I saw his co-founder, Jim Clark, who was the business guy who put it all together, was worth $500 million. I'm like, hold on for a second. I think I'm beginning to see how the world values things. And so I was very interested in bringing new things into the world. And I think that ultimately what you realize, especially if you're a capitalist like I am, is that building a business, creating value, making something sustainable economically is the best way to have an impact in the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. I think it is interesting just because with the boom of AI, I think we're kind of switching more towards a meritocratic society where things are going to be more project based, and you know I, 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 kind of see that shift a little bit. But yeah, I mean 100%. I think it's just interesting seeing that these technology businesses like Google, Apple, Microsoft, coming from Silicon Valley in such a short amount of time, they've been able to grow into these billion-dollar, trillion-dollar companies. When you look at kind of other industries historically, it would take, you know, 30, 40, 50, 100 years to kind of get to that scale. So just these technology companies, it's absolutely incredible. Um, and when did you kind of know that, obviously it sounded like you had multiple exits. When did you know that, after, was it the first exit, the second exit, that you just wanted to kind of, it seems like you're sitting on a lot of advisory boards and you're kind of, a VC, and you're living that amazing lifestyle that a lot of us, early stage entrepreneurs are aspiring to kind of live. When did you kind of know that, you wanted to just be an advisor, spend kind of full time helping out the next generation of entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I think that there are two factors that went into that. The first is even before I was quote unquote successful, even before I had real exits that could change my life financially, I was already advising folks. And that's because even though I hadn't been successful, I had the battle scars. I had gone through and helped start multiple companies and worked with all sorts of founders and entrepreneurs and other folks like that. And because of that, I was able to help as an advisor, especially to first time entrepreneurs, because they would say, well, how do I do this? And this is all new to me. And I'd say, well, let me explain. And also, by the way, it's a lot easier now because when I had to start raising money, if you want to find an angel investor, you had to ask around and say, do you know anybody who's rich? As opposed to going to something like Angel List or going into social media or having a long list of people that you could easily obtain from PitchBook. So part of it was that I had already started the process of mentoring and working with other people even before those exits came. And I knew I enjoyed it. And I felt that I was good at it, or at least the people that I was working with thought I was good at it, which is probably the most important judgment that you have. And then what ended up happening after that is I came to realize that it was very hard for me to be a founder CEO without having it consume my life. And the last time I was a CEO was in 2007. And this is when my kids were relatively young. So I'd been working and doing all these different things. And I jumped back into the CEO chair. And at the time, my kids were 5 and 3. And it was too much. I would, get up at 6 a.m. so I could get the kids to daycare and other things like that. I'd go into the office and work. I'd leave the office, come home, have dinner with my family, and then work until 2 a.m. and then start up 4 hours later and repeat that process. And was that, strictly speaking, necessary? I don't know. Right? I think that there are people who manage to maintain their balance in their life, even when they're running a company. That was not me. I did not have the ability to do that. And so I concluded I needed to get out of the CEO business. And I did think that maybe someday when my kids were grown, that I would be interested in going back. And then I got to the point where my kids were grown and I'm like, no, I have zero interest in going back. In fact, I get to work with amazing entrepreneurs. I get to live vicariously through their triumphs, also through their struggles. And I'm perfectly happy not to be the one who is lying awake at night wondering how I'm going to make payroll in 3 days.
Mhm. 100%. I think that's that's so interesting that you made that shift back in 2007, just because I think so many things have happened after 2007 with, the launch of smartphones, the
Hmm.
economic crisis, just a handful of things. I mean, ever since 2012, 2013, like Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, a ton of big Y Combinator startups have kind of blossomed after that. And it seems like
Absolutely.
the
All of
crisis.
OpenAI comes after
Yep.
that.
Right, right. And I actually think a lot of YCs, a lot of the big YC companies kind of come after 2007, 2008,
Oh, absolutely.
even
No
a lot of new
question.
startup terms. So,
And again, it's very tempting to say, oh man, why don't I go back to that? Why don't I start a company with all that I know now? Wouldn't it be great? After all, I'm giving advice to all these people. But at
Mhm.
the end of the day, the question is, why do that? Um, for some people, it is they want to prove something. I don't feel like I have anything to prove. For some people, it's like, I want more money and power. I'm like, I'm pretty happy with where I am right now. I would rather work with other people and help them achieve the things they want to achieve and live the life I want to lead. One of the things that I believe in is having a mission statement for yourself. This is actually a part of my friend Reid Hoffman's book, The Startup of You, which he wrote with my other friend Ben Kaznoka, and I am actually in the book as one of the subjects of the book because I talk about my mission, which is to help interesting people do interesting things. And the important thing about that formulation is it's not, I want to be the most interesting man in the world. It's, I want to help interesting people do interesting things. I want to learn from other people. I want to benefit from other people. And I don't mind being in the background for those things.
Wow, I love that. I love that mission statement, and I think, um, yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to go about it. I think I like that what you're saying. Kind of, you get to live vicariously in in the wins and even the losses sometimes that a lot of the founders that you're advising face. Um, Going back to your career as well. So in 2007, besides, you know, being swamped with your family, with your career, what was there any other kind of epiphany that you had that, you wanted to shift more that advisor position? Because that is quite a while ago. I mean, it's 18 years ago. And I know you seem fairly young. Obviously age is ambiguous, of course.
Yes. Good
But
genes.
yeah, good genes, of course. But obviously, I think you're probably maybe in your mid 30s being a CEO. I think a lot of people want to go and aspire to
Yeah.
have that CEO founder life. Was there anything else that kind of was it just really work life balance? Is that your ultimate reasoning?
That was really my primary thing.
Mm.
I missed the life of being CEO. So I was CEO for the first time in 1999. And so I felt like, oh man, I'm missing out. I need to give it another shot. And again, it was different. When in 1999, I was the guy who was like, let's work Sunday night. I didn't
Mhm.
have family, and usually I was in the office on the West Coast, and my wife was still back on the East Coast because we were still living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because I was still going to school at Harvard Business School while running a company in Silicon Valley. And so I'd be like, yes, work all the time, all the time. That's perfect. That's all I want to do. And by the time I went back to it as a CEO in 2007, what was different is I had two kids.
Mhm.
And I'm like, this is different. I mean,
Mhm.
I can still do the same things I did before, but now I don't want to do them in the same way. There are other things I are part of my life other than just work. And so it really boiled down to, is this the life I want to lead? And I think that that's one of the pieces of advice I want to give to people, especially folks, the high achievers in this community, which is it's very easy to do what the world wants you to do. Because guess what? The world would have wanted me to go out and start more companies and be a CEO.
Sure.
because there are all my friends who are venture capitalists who are like, hey, we'd like to make some more money. And other people are like, hey, it'd be great to work in a company and make some money and get the attention and the news stories and all that. And I had all that at an earlier age. But what I believe is you have to ask yourself, what are the things you actually enjoy? Not just the things that bring you status, not just the things that sound cool. What is it that actually makes you happy? And for me, what actually makes me happy is being able to talk with interesting people, help them solve their problems, write interesting content, share my thoughts with the world in a way that appears to have an impact. Those are the kinds of things I want to do. And being CEO didn't necessarily help me do those things.
That makes sense. And just curious, when you're, when you're a grad student, you're, in the late 90s and kind of that first tranche of being a CEO, what was an average day looking like? What did an average day look like for you, and how did you make yourself optimal to be that CEO and also to be that graduate student at Harvard?
Yeah, so that was a strange time because you may remember, I just mentioned this, I was going to school full time and also working full time. And so what I did was I would fly to the Bay Area on Sunday night or on Sunday, because you're going from east to west. It would arrive Sunday afternoon. And then I would try to get work done. If I felt I could, I would, until I started complaining, I would call my employees in on Sunday night so we could get more work done. Because, hey, I'm in town. This is your chance to get work done. For some strange reason, they weren't eager to work every Sunday night. I don't know what it is. And then I would be working on Monday and Tuesday, and I would basically try to pack everything in as much as possible. It's like, okay, let me get to the office super early. Let me get up as soon as I'm up, start emailing, start working. Let me get to the office early. Hey, all day, everyone who wants to meet with me, let's go, let's make progress. Work until dinner time, keep working until everyone else was exhausted, and then say, okay, I guess I better turn in. And do that Monday and Tuesday, and then fly back Tuesday night to get back in time to take a 8 a.m. class on Wednesday morning on the red eye. So that's what I was doing. And it was because I was young and was just driven to move and go all the time. And I would also try to, get some exercise and stuff like that. I would get some cardio, try to go to the gym and all those things. But I didn't do a perfect job of those, but I was still young enough that it didn't really matter. So that was what life was like then. But then, you get further along in years, and it's the same reason that professional athletes aren't the same at 35 as they are at 22. Uh, Life just works differently that way. And I still feel like, even now at my age, I feel like, I have the ability to go hard and go harder than most other people. But the question is, do I want to? And is that actually the way to be most effective? And can I find ways to work smarter as much as possible?
I think I like that kind of mindset of working smarter, not necessarily harder. Um, yeah, I know a lot of super athletes like LeBron James and even Manny Pacquiao just made a comeback this past summer. A lot of them are changing up their training camp and working a lot more strategic with their health and their diet and doing blood work and
And by the way, amazing, right? I mean, LeBron James is about to enter his 23rd NBA season. No other player in NBA history has played a 23rd season. Every other NBA player in history who played a 22nd season was sitting at the end of the bench playing like 5 minutes a game, and he's scoring 25 points a game. It's insane.
yeah, it's incredible. It's absolutely amazing. Uh, Going back on your books, want to jump into kind of your author
Mhm.
career. What was the first book that you mentioned before
Yeah.
Blitzscaling?
So the
And
first
how
the
did you write
first
it?
book that I wrote with my friends Reid, Hoffman, and Ben Casnocha is called The Alliance, and it's
Okay.
about managing talent in the networked age. So it's, how should you deal with your employees in an age where everyone's interconnected and where people do not work at the same company for 30 years? How do you be honest with folks when most employment relationships are temporary? And how do you build permanent relationships in that kind of era? And so this is actually an offshoot or a semi-sequel to their previous book, The Startup of You, which was about how you as an individual managing your career should think of yourself as the CEO of a startup. And the question is, okay, well, if all your employees think of themselves as CEOs of startups, how do you manage them? How do you recruit these folks? How do you manage them? How do you retain them? And how do you know when it's time for them to go and fly the nest and build something amazing? And there's great examples of that. I think I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. I saw that my friend Reid Hoffman, my co-author and friend, just put out a new podcast where he talks a little bit about Figma. Dylan Field was an intern at LinkedIn long, long ago. And many of the folks at LinkedIn ended up investing in Figma when Dylan started it simply because they thought Dylan was amazing. And they're very happy now, obviously, that Figma has gone public and is worth whatever, $70 billion or what have you. And that's a great example of, all right, how do you recognize this kind of brilliance when you see it? And how do you cultivate it? And how do you ultimately profit from it? And with the alliance, it's all about, okay, we can find someone like a Dylan Field. We can have him come into LinkedIn. We can have him do some great stuff while he's here and maintain a relationship with him as he goes on throughout his career. In his case, to found a multi-billion-dollar company and to benefit from that instead of saying, oh, let me just try to keep Dylan Field working here at LinkedIn the rest of his career.
Wow, that's incredible. I really am a fan of entrepreneurship. I think that's I think that's huge in a
Yeah.
lot of bigger corporations. And then Blitzscaling. So that was released back in 2018, 2019,
Fall of
what
2018,
fall
October.
of 2018. What made you write Blitzscaling or co-author Blitzscaling?
Yeah, so blitzscaling really came out of a question that Reid had posed, which is, what is the actual secret of Silicon Valley? Why is Silicon Valley as successful as it is? What is different about it and the approach here than in other places? Because, of course, you can say, well, there's schools, there's venture capital, there's a culture, but those things are not unique. And so we set out to answer that question. And when we looked at the issue more closely, what we concluded was that the most successful companies were successful because they won a valuable winner take most market. And they won that market by being more aggressive, by being more decisive, by moving faster than the competition. And so that's what blitzscaling came from. We wanted to answer that question. We looked over Reid's own career, to some extent my career, although we really focused on Reid's career since his career is one of the most astonishing ones that's ever existed. As well as, we taught a class at Stanford that allowed us to attract in all these amazing entrepreneurs that Reid knew. But hey, guess what? The opportunity to be a part of a class at Stanford and talk to the students is almost irresistible. So we were able to get Brian Chesky from Airbnb and Reed Hastings from Netflix and Eric Schmidt from Google. And the
Wow.
list goes on to come in. Sam Altman back before OpenAI, who's coming in his capacity as president of Y Combinator. And he came in and spoke. So that gives you an example of how we were able to attract these people in. And again, in many cases, these amazing achievers didn't realize what had allowed them to be successful. But by hearing all their stories, we're able to take a couple steps back and recognize what it was.
Wow, that's fantastic. It kind of reminds me of Tools of Our Titans a little. Well,
Yes,
obviously,
Tim Ferriss.
yeah, Tim Ferriss. I love Tim Ferriss. Um,
Brilliant. Tim Ferriss is one of the guys who exemplifies working smarter, not harder, although he does work like a maniac. I mean, the idea that Tim accomplishes all he does in 4 hours is completely wrong. That's a misconception about the 4 hour work week. But something like Tools of Titans is, again, a brilliant idea for how to write an amazing book in much less time.
mhm. Um, so you're obviously close friends with Reid Hoffman. You've met all these amazing entrepreneurs. What do you think differentiates like a high achiever and a high performer than just a really intelligent person that maybe doesn't have those types of skills?
Yeah. So I would say, first and foremost, it's very important to note that luck is a big part of it. Um, there's
Hmm.
no question. I've been very lucky in my life. Reid's been lucky in his life. Obviously, I think he's an incredibly accomplished guy, but luck plays a role. You have to be born in the right place at the right time. As Warren Buffett once put it, I won the ovarian lottery when I was born, where I was here in the United States, the time that I was, because my particular skills would not necessarily be useful under other circumstances. So luck always plays a role. But beyond that, I think what's really critical is, and this is a word that we probably overuse in the venture capital industry, but I think really applies here, is that sense of conviction. It's the ability to say, I really believe this to be true. I have reasons to believe it. I'm not just being stubborn. And I don't care if the rest of the world disagrees. I'm going to find a way to make this happen. And having that kind of conviction, which in Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, he described as being contrarian and right, is one of the keys to success. It's very difficult to become successful doing what everyone else thinks is going to make you successful because you don't stand out. Everyone else is doing the same thing. All you can do is try to do it faster and harder, which, again, maybe you can make it work, but that's difficult. It's far easier in many ways to identify an overlooked opportunity that other people don't believe in and then make that work. So whether you're a George Lucas making a science fiction movie when people thought they were not money makers, and where he basically gave up a bunch of his director's fee because the studio was like, oh man, this Star Wars thing you're making, it's really going over budget. If you want to finish it, you're going to have to give up some of your money. And they said, tell you what, since you're giving up your director's fee, we'll give you the merchandising rights. Fortunately, that's never valuable. Sometimes you have to bet on yourself. And again, you bet on yourself, and sometimes you lose. People are not always correct. Francis Ford Coppola, brilliant filmmaker, just put out a movie called Megalopolis. It would probably be the second or third time he's nearly bankrupted himself because he's bet on himself multiple times and hasn't always been right. But you know what? I don't think he regrets it because he got to live life the way he wanted to live it.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. And just one more thing, Chris. I know we're at around 40 minutes. What is just do you have any word of wisdom or advice that you'd like to share? Now you've already shared a lot of wisdom advice, but any words of wisdom or advice that you'd like to share now?
So one of the most important words of wisdom, and I will first relay what my friend Reid Hoffman often says, and then I will add my own twist on it. What Reid often points out is that almost nothing about life is an individual sport. We all know about individual sports like tennis or something like that, or golf. And even those sports are not truly individual sports. You have a coach, you have a caddy, you have people who are on your side. And one of the things that you need to think about in life is, who are you going to get on your team? Who's going to be your tribe? Who's going to be in your corner? Who's going to be supporting you? Because we can't do this on our own. As much as we like to think we just have to work harder, we just have to spend a little more time thinking, come up with that brilliant strategy. At the end of the day, if you can't convince other people to join you, you're not going to be successful. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. And my twist on it is, okay, how do you build that tribe? How do you find those people? And my response is, meet as many smart and interesting people as you can, and then wait. So people often say, wow, you've met all these amazing people in your life, and they have gone on to do all these great things. How did you meet them? I'm like, well, I met them before they were famous. I met them when they were starting out. I met them when I went to school with them, or I met them at a conference, or what have you. And you just never know where these various relationships are going to go. I remember, for example, my friend Rob Castaneda. He runs a company called Service Rocket. This is a great example on two levels. So first of all, Service Rocket is an enormously successful company. It has over 400 employees around the world. How did Service Rocket get started? Rob was talking to some college friends of his, and they said, hey, we would love if you were able to build a services company to help serve the software that we're building, because we don't want to do it, and we'll turn the leads over to you. And he decided to do this. Now, Rob is Colombian, a Colombian by ancestry, who is an Australian by birth and upbringing. And the friends of his from college who asked him to do this happened to be the founders of Atlassian. So Service Rocket became this company that did all this work for Atlassian customers. And they now work on behalf of other companies like NVIDIA and many others, and they're wildly successful. Rob is incredibly successful. And I met Rob at a conference probably 20 years ago, maybe 18 years ago. And we just struck up a conversation, and we stayed in touch. Later on, he said, hey, I know these folks at UCSF, they're looking to do a project. I can't do it for them, but I think you and your startup company can. And so ended up doing this big project with UCSF, which was very cool. And again, Rob and I stayed in touch. And then later on, we were chatting about things, and he was like, "Oh, yeah, I'd like to invest in Blitzscaling Ventures." And he's now one of our largest LPs. And sometimes I borrow his office at Service Rocket when I want to do meetings with folks. And again, however many years ago, some guy running a services company, some guy with a startup company, who knew what they were going to be? At that time, I was not a best-selling author. He wasn't a hugely successful CEO, but we stayed in touch. And I think that that is really what it's about. You got to have some patience in this world, and you got to build a relationship of trust over time. And if you do that, if you meet smart, interesting people, you help each other, you build a tribe, and you wait, because smart and interesting people tend to do pretty amazing things, you're going to get the results you're looking for.
That's fantastic. And I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of people are just impatient, and if you wait, I think good things will come. And if you're around the right people, and I definitely good things are bound to happen, whether it's even if it's a failure, I think it can turn into a fantastic thing.
Absolutely. If you ever get a chance, tell people to look at the story of General Magic, the greatest company that ever failed. This is a company that was an abject failure. But the team that they assembled to go after that opportunity and all the things they learned along the way, it was folks like Tony Fadell, for example, who went on to create the iPod and Nest and other things. This is a company that failed, but in its failure, it succeeded because its team went on to do amazing things.
Awesome. Well, Chris, I really, really appreciate your time today. I've enjoyed this conversation. I will put some information about your books in the show notes for our listeners. But thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on the Gildre Spotlight podcast.
Absolutely. And remember where they can always go is they can go to chrisyeh.com. And on that website, you'll find my blog, you'll find my books, you'll find information. If, for example, you run an organization, a YPO chapter or something like that, where you want a speaker, you can find all that information at chrisyeh.com, which is CHRISYEH.com.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Tiger.